Tshwane Metro police officers have vowed to continue working hard to fight drunk driving on the capital city's roads. This comes after 3 constables died while on duty on Sunday morning in a head-on collision with a suspected drunk driver. Tshwane Metro held a memorial service for the 3 officers earlier today in Pretoria. We now look at the behavioural change amongst society when it comes to alcohol consumption. Taking this discussion further, we're now joined on the line by Professor Ivor Sarakinky from the Wits School of Governance. Prof, as always, thank you for availing yourself to SABC News.
Real pleasure, Flo, and good afternoon to listeners.
Just as a start, Prof, should we be concerned about the many South Africans that we saw? I was looking at social media yesterday who went to queue and stockpile on alcohol. Surely that's not something to be excited about and not really something that's really funny, is it? Are we faced with an addiction problem in this country, and is it really a crisis?
I'm not sure whether it's an addiction or whether it's at crisis levels, but I think it's now very clear that South Africa has a very bad relationship with alcohol, and government now needs to explore options in terms of dealing with the way alcohol is such an important part of so many people's lives. This is clearly a problem.
And was the government right to, stop South Africans, stop us from buying alcohol during the sort of harder lockdowns? A lot of people were saying, government should let us drink. If we're going to be sitting at home anyway during lockdown, we might as well be allowed to sit at home and have and consume alcohol while we sit in our homes. Do you believe now, looking at some of the incidences that have happened since then, that perhaps the government might have been right to take away that right of being able to purchase alcohol while we deal with this pandemic?
I think the ban on alcohol was more credible than the ban on tobacco products, because the data before lockdown showed that alcohol is a major contributing factor to violence, and that's what fills up hospitals over weekends. So I think the data was clear, and I think the decision was on the right track in terms of restricting access to alcohol, in terms of the early assumptions on the COVID-19 crisis. We now have better data, and we can see that hospitals aren't being filled up as we expected in terms of the models, and that means there's room for maneuver now in terms of rethinking how we retail and consume alcohol as South African citizens.
Now, Prof, 3 police officers, as you might have read, in Pretoria were killed due to, a drunk driver. It seems that with all the efforts that have been made in the country to stop people from drinking under the influence, it still happens. And, we still see people being killed by drunk drivers. Where do we go from here to change this sort of behavior and alcohol abuse, and people still getting behind the wheel after they've had too much to drink?
The first step is a public awareness and a public education program, where the promotion of healthy drinking for those who wish to drink is in the highlight of that. Prohibition doesn't work. It pushes alcohol consumption and manufacture underground. So education in terms of managing consumption better is the first step through concerted programs. And the second dimension to this is law enforcement. We need concerted and rigorous enforcement of the law in terms of alcohol consumption, with increased penalties in terms of being banned from driving if you get caught with certain levels of alcohol in your blood. And we need to stamp out bribery and corruption at the point of roadblocks, where those who are caught sometimes are able to escape consequence by bribing police officers administering the tests and doing the licensing. So an overhaul of the criminal justice system to ensure that sharp consequences are delivered quickly to those who break the law. And I think that will have a positive effect in combination with a behavior change public awareness program.
I'm interested in you speaking of the education. In what form would this sort of education take to help the public be more aware? I mean, we've kind of seen these awareness campaigns in the past, don't drink and drive, all of these kinds of campaigns we've seen in the past that have been directed at people who would be getting behind the wheel after they've been drinking. In what form should this sort of education against drinking and driving really take? I mean, what I'm getting at is should it be taking place in some kind of a formal structure? What are your ideas?
Well, it needs to start at school, primary school, high school, and at tertiary levels as well, in terms of informing people on what the positives, if there are any, and negatives of alcohol are, and to try and create an awareness of what a healthy level of consumption is. So not to binge drink, not to overdo it, but to have an occasional drink and to get people to understand that. The other side of the campaign has to be aimed at society as a whole through the media. And what overseas experience has shown is that brutal and short TV adverts where you show the consequences of drunken driving in terms of the bodies and the car wrecks seems to have a positive effect in getting the message through. So I think that the campaign needs to have a supportive, positive, reinforcing dimension, and at the same time, a negative consequence dimension in terms of what happens when people drink and drive, so that people can see it on the screen and cringe. And that sometimes gets behavior change. And again, coupled to stringent criminal justice and law enforcement. Those are the kinds of things I would suggest.
I mean, talking of advertisements, we know that there is actually a ban on tobacco products being advertised, for instance, on television. And I wonder what your view is on the advertisements of alcohol. I mean, these sort of adverts we see basically on a day-to-day basis. And maybe is that something that perhaps needs to change?
I'm a bit cautious about blanket bans. I think that if advertising is done responsibly, it can have more positive effects. And that means that some guidelines on alcohol advertising need to be put in place. And we need to moderate this glamorization of alcohol consumption. Drinking alcohol doesn't make you a man. It doesn't make you cool. It doesn't make you anything. You do it and you enjoy it, and to focus on the more positive reasons on that, so that you don't reinforce negative stereotypes about how people understand and relate to alcohol. So advertise, but within a parameter which moderates the message that alcohol advertising sends out.
All right. Prof, as always, thank you for giving us your time. Professor Ivor Sarakinky, who's at the Wits School of Governance. Thanks for your time, sir.